Welcome back, everybody, to the David Pakman Show. Luke Beasley here, filling in for David while he is away. I know many of you get sad when David's gone. Totally understand that, but stick around because I'm going to make it worth your while. I can guarantee that starting off with this, President Biden very nicely and brilliantly, you could say, called out Lauren Boebert, mocked Lauren Boebert for one of the subjects I love to see Republicans called out on the most, which is when a Democrat can identify a Republican taking credit for or no longer opposing something legislative action wise, Democratic agenda wise, that they very aggressively opposed when it was actually time to implement that policy. So in this case, Biden's recognizing that now Lauren Boebert is pretty okay with some benefits her district is getting because of Democratic agenda items that she fought against. And then we'll get to him calling out someone else as well. So here's this from a recent Bidenomics speech in New Mexico.
What Arcosa is doing here is part of a much broader clean energy manufacturing. It's going to happen in big cities and rural communities as well. Like in Colorado, where CS Wind broke ground on what will be the world's largest wind tower manufacturing plant. And coincidentally, CS Wind is Congresswoman Lauren Boebert. You know, that very quiet Republican lady? It's in her district, who, along with every other Republican, voted against this bill. And it's making all this possible. And she railed against its passage. But that's okay, she's welcoming it now. When I ran for office, I promised to be president for all Americans. Whether you live in a blue state or a red state, I'm going to keep my promise. Before we made this, what Arcosa is.
I think that's the way to do it. Recognize that, hey, Republicans in Lauren Boebert's district, this project and these or this funding is going to benefit you and your district, and know that the person representing you would have had it a very different way if she got her way and didn't want this funding, this project to be made possible in your district. But I'm not punishing voters who didn't vote for me, and I'm not only trying to benefit voters who voted for me. I'm going to try to benefit all Americans' lives. I think that's a very good message that a lot of people can resonate with for sure. And then before discussing further, he also made a similar point about Tommy Tuberville.
Already, we're saving nearly 170,000 New Mexico families $30 a month on their internet bills so far. We're making investments like this all across the country. I just could pause for another second. There's a distinguished senator from the state of Alabama who used to be a pretty good football coach. And he's railed against this legislation. And then I noticed he had a big announcement. Alabama's going to get $1.2 billion for internet. And I thought, wait a minute. Didn't he rail against that for a long, long time? I was inclined to go down and help him celebrate, but I decided not to. Look.
In one way, it's funny and a little jab you can make, but in another, it's so aggravating because anytime you point out these different either individual projects or just concepts of governing, such as progressive programs like Medicare, Social Security, that you know the conservative ideology both fought against and would fight against if this debate was coming up today, knowing that all of these things wouldn't be possible if the conservative ideology and whatever party it was manifesting at that point in time got its way, is really aggravating and should be aggressively called out. And so sometimes I think it's funny doing it in a sort of humorous way, and then sometimes maybe you get a little bit more serious. And if you pull up, I've done this before on my show, you can find that, of course, at Luke Beasley on YouTube, just looking at the various projects, and you can go find this yourself. Super interesting interactive map that I'm pulling up on screen will describe for the podcast listeners, where you can see where this different funding is going towards in the bipartisan infrastructure law that Democrats pushed for and Biden led on, and just dive into the specifics of all these different projects that will benefit all different regions of the country. And these things matter. And I think when you recognize the way that Republicans kind of, once these things start being implemented, or once these programs are popular, such as Medicare and Social Security, then want to absolutely be seen as on board and a part of the solution. That proves that obviously it's good policy. And all of the accusations of Biden's going to be this socialist, he's going to make America bankrupt with crazy projects that have been paid for, it's all just nonsense. It's all political. It's not actually a thoughtful critique of the policy because, again, I think Pete Buttigieg, I covered in the past, said something to the effect of the sign of a good policy is those who opposed it then want to take credit for it, which is definitely what we see. Then one more just funny moment where he takes a jab at Trump.
Be like, what the hell's a wind tower? That's a key component. You have to have it to hold up those blades. You know how long? By the way, I was in eastern Colorado looking at the blades manufactured. Those blades are 103 yards long, longer than a football field. And by the way, they don't cause cancer.
And of course, referencing his predecessor, Donald Trump's claim to that effect, rather absurd. I do think our previous conversation about Republicans taking credit for Democratic policies is a reminder of the fact that you really should press for specifics when someone says the Biden administration has been a complete disaster and all of his policies are creating mayhem and it's terrible. Not because there aren't fair criticisms of the Biden administration. There are. I think most of them, though, come from the progressive direction. But because often the people making that accusation the most boldly don't actually have the details to back it up, because a lot of these policies are just really good, especially Biden's landmark achievements. And the list I'll go through whenever I hear something like that with people is the American Rescue Plan. Let's just go through this. American Rescue Plan, is that the thing you have a big issue with? Trillions of dollars of relief when relief was needed after the economic downturn that the pandemic caused. Millions of jobs created based on an independent analysis because of that legislation. First major gun safety bill in decades, pulling out of America's longest war. Largest investment in green energy in history. Millions of green energy jobs will be created in the future because of that. Lowering prescription drug costs, including Medicare being able to negotiate drug prices and capping the cost of insulin at $35 out of pocket per month for Medicare recipients. Republicans blocked that being applied to all Americans, raising the minimum wage for federal government workers. Ketanji Brown Jackson on the court. Many conservatives do have an issue with that, all of them. PACT Act, healthcare to veteran toxic burn pit victims. The Chips and Science Act, bringing more semiconductor manufacturing to America. Once in a generation infrastructure law, rebuilding roads and bridges, increasing access to clean, reliable drinking water, repairing airports, expanding broadband, investing in passenger rail. Are those all the things that prove Biden has been a complete disaster and is destroying America? That doesn't make much sense, right? And that's why I think getting into a conversation about the specifics of the policies, and not just vaguely, Biden's terrible, is important. Again, not because there aren't criticisms, but because these policies, a lot of people aren't as comfortable saying, yeah, all that's terrible when you really go through it. Or even his economic record, they'll say he's run the economy into the ground. But considering the context he took over within, the economic downturn that the pandemic had caused and the pandemic that Trump had mishandled. And now we're all the way back down to historic low unemployment, 50-year low getting hit while Biden's president when it comes to unemployment, inflation down to 3% after it's spiking because of that economic reality and the response to it, and dropping lower than other G7 countries on inflation in the United States, real wages increasing 2.4% GDP growth. These are good metrics, especially when you consider the reality that Biden took over within. And so that's why if you really push for details, some of these arguments hold a whole lot less water.
30 million trees are destroyed every year for toilet paper in the U.S. alone. So toilet paper is a big contributor to deforestation and climate change. Our sponsor, Real Paper, makes toilet paper from bamboo. Bamboo plants keep growing, which means no deforestation. Bamboo also absorbs 5 times as much carbon from the atmosphere as pine trees. And bamboo toilet paper is stronger than regular toilet paper and even softer. So bamboo toilet paper is all around a win for you and for the environment. It's time to move on from that toilet paper from trees that you're using at home. When you use Real Paper, doesn't feel like you're sacrificing anything. It's soft and fluffy, and they'll ship it to your door in plastic-free packaging on a schedule. Super easy. With every box of Real Paper you buy, They are funding reforestation efforts across the country through their partnership with One Tree Planted. So unlike the toilet paper that cuts down trees, Real is helping to actively plant them. Go to realpaper.com/Pacman and use code Pacman for 30% off your first order and free shipping. The link is down below.